Hi, everyone. My name's Maddie. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Vice President, Equity and Campaigns for the Continuing Education Students Association of Ryerson, or CESAR. We have two ASL interpreters here with us, and we're really grateful for their work and that they're presenting with us tonight. So thank you so much, Chris and Jody.
Hi folks, my name is Zaid. I'm just going to do a land acknowledgement before we get too far into the event. So I know that we're all tuning in from different areas today, so I invite you to look up the land in which you're currently on and the treaty responsibilities for that area, as well as the Indigenous people who safeguard and protect the land. And you can do that at native-land.ca. So, sorry, let me just find my spot again. So we're in the Dish with One Spoon territory. The Dish with One Spoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Mississaugas that bound them to share that territory and protect that land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and all newcomers have been welcomed into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. So for folks who maybe don't know what that bowl means or what that looks like, so it's the idea that Southern Ontario, or this area in which we find ourselves situated in, is very much the bowl, as meaning that it is a very naturally rich resource area. So traditionally, a lot of Indigenous nations came to this area and settled here and worked together peacefully because it was such a naturally rich area. Ooh. And that ended up looking like a peace sharing agreement, and that's why with the dish it's a spoon and not a fork or a knife to represent the peace that was brought into that treaty. So while we're talking about sexual violence, I think it's really important that we discuss the way in conversations around sexual violence and harassment are very much not only rooted in colonialism, but wouldn't exist without colonialism in a sense. So while we discuss sexual violence and sexual harassment, we need to acknowledge not only the ways in which colonialism and white supremacy uphold rape culture, but also how they are intricately linked. Indigenous women and Two-Spirit people face sexual violence at 3 times. Land is stolen without consent, and the list goes on. Violence against women and girls globally is not a phenomenon. It is colonial patriarchy working directly as it was designed. So I just wanted to start us off with that.
Thank you, Zaid. And we're grateful for this opportunity to collaborate with the Sexual Harassment and Assault Resource Exchange and the Center for Safer Sex and Sexual Violence Support to learn more about fighting against sexual harassment in the workplace. Workers have the right to safety on the job and a work environment that is free from sexual violence no matter where you work. Every day, workers face unwanted comments or behavior, and survivors are consistently silenced, shamed, and dismissed. We hope that this session gives you some helpful information about what sexual harassment in the workplace can look like and feel like, and what your options are. We know that the topic can be difficult and triggering, so we have active listeners, myself and Zaid, in a separate Zoom call for anyone who might be feeling overwhelmed or anxious and would like someone to talk to or someone to listen and support them. Thanks again for joining us, and I'll turn it over now to Nora and to our panelists.
Perfect. Well, thanks so much. I hope everybody can hear me okay. I see our interpreters are interpreting, so that's great. That's a good sign. So folks from the Center for Safer Sex and Sexual Violence wanted to first start off by chatting a bit about triggers and language. So how about if folks take that away?
Sure, I'd be happy to do that, Nora. Hello, everyone. My name is Daisha. So I am going to be reading the trigger warning. So let's start with that. This evening, the Sexual Harassment and Assault Resource Exchange, or SHARE, will be discussing standing up to sexual harassment with us. During tonight's discussion, we will be talking about sexual violence, specifically sexual harassment, and we recognize the potential that this discussion has to bring up thoughts or feelings for some folks. With that being said, if at any point during tonight's discussion, you are feeling triggered, or maybe you're just feeling like some things are coming up for you, we want you to know we have active listeners on standby, as Maddie has said, and they would be happy to go into a breakout room with you to have a separate meeting and speak to you and listen to you. We'll actually put that link in the chat for the separate Zoom meeting. And if you would like to speak to an active learner, please just send a private message to our moderator, my apologies, Zaid, and they will actually set you up in a breakout room. And with that, I will pass it to Parneet, who's actually going to be speaking about the language acknowledgement.
Thank you so much, Daisha and everyone else. So my name is Parneet. I'm one of the panelists along with Daisha. So I'm going to be now reading to you the language acknowledgement. So SHARE, the Continuing Education Students Association of Ryerson, the Ryerson Students Union, and the Center for Safer Sex and Sexual Violence Support acknowledges that gender is a spectrum. It's only for the individual to determine how they identify and how they express their gender. It's also up to them to determine the vocabulary they use to communicate those aspects of themselves. Norms that support gender inequities, hypermasculinity, and adherence to traditional gender roles, and a general acceptance of violence do not only perpetuate sexual violence, but also breed homophobia and transphobia. By making these connections and intentionally working to advance both LGBTQ2S+ rights and end sexual violence, advocacy can create equitable and safe communities for all gender identities and sexual orientations. We further acknowledge that survivors have the right to define themselves and their experiences in ways that have meaning for them. We aim to use non-judgmental and all-inclusive terms such as people who have experienced gender-based violence and/or sexual violence, and people who identify as survivors, while recognizing that some people may not find these terms personally useful either. In the end, it's important that peer supporters recognize and support each individual's way of naming their experiences and talking about themselves as part of the healing process. I'd now like to turn the next part to Daisha, where she will be talking about intersectional approach to sexual violence support.
My apologies, I was on mute. Thank you, Parneet. So we do acknowledge that acts of sexual violence are linked to acts of systemic oppression, including but not limited to sexism, racism, colonialism, ableism, homophobia as well, and transphobia. So now more than ever, it is very important that strategies to prevent sexual violence and other forms of violence are rooted in an understanding of the larger structures of systemic oppressions that shape our society. With that being said, who is targeted, if someone is believed, their access to the legal system, and whether they receive support are just a few examples of how systemic oppression impacts one's experience of sexual violence.
So from there, we wanted to give some quick introductions to folks who are speaking tonight. Can folks hear me, or have I frozen? Oh no, I hope I haven't frozen. Okay, perfect. Deisha, if you please introduce yourself.
Of course, I'd love to. So yeah, my name is Daisha. I'm in the left-hand picture there. My preferred pronouns are she and her. I am currently working for the Center for Safer Sex and Sexual Violence Support as a part-time coordinator. And yeah, I'm a first-year student at Ryerson University, and I'm quite happy to be here tonight.
Okay, so I'll introduce myself. I'm also one of the panelists with Daisha. My name is Parneet Kaur. I'm the one in the middle here in the picture. The pronouns I go by are she and her. I'm also one of the part-time coordinators at the Center for Safer Sex and Sexual Violence Support. I'm also so happy to be here as part of as being a panelist and sharing with you all this very important and crucial information with you all tonight.
Perfect. And my name is Nora Dillon. I'm a legal advisor at the Ontario Human Rights Legal Support Centre on our Sexual Harassment and Assault Resource Exchange project. I'm also a part-time student when I'm not at work as well. And I'm very excited to be here. And I want to say, you know, the RSU and CESAR, they put in so much work to help make this happen today. And we're very grateful to be here and to be chatting with you folks. And my pronouns are she and her. Perfect. So just to give a bit of an overview of what we'll be covering tonight, we'll start off with just talking about what is sexual harassment, how do we define it, and then you're also going to discuss a bit about what are some of the myths around sexual harassment and the myths around sexual harassment and the law, as well as what is power, what is consent, identifying sexual harassment, having some like safety tips and tricks in your back pocket, just in case you ever need to know these things. And we're going to talk about assertiveness in sexual harassment as well, and what the process looks like to reporting sexual harassment from a legal perspective. So you kind of get an idea of what's happening in the back burner if you ever need to go to HR to report this. Perfect. So with this in mind, we just wanted to introduce folks to some of the functions we're going to use tonight and get to know folks a little bit. So we're going to be sending around a poll right now, and we would like to know, what is your favorite season, please? Oh, actually, before that, we're asking another question. Is this your first event on sexual violence? Just to kind of give us a chance to attending your first event on sexual violence on campus or elsewhere, just to give us a chance to understand where folks are coming from today. Okay, a lot of people. It's your first event here. Well, don't hesitate to let us know if you have questions. We'll have a chance for that at the end. Perfect. And from there, just to get to know folks' question, we'd like to know what your favorite season is as well.
As a panelist, I can't vote, but I definitely say my favorite season is fall.
Interesting.
Yeah. I mean, you can layer up, you can layer down, you don't have to worry about snow. You know?
I like the fall fashion. I don't know if folks are going to agree with us, but we'll have to see.
Yeah, let's see.
For me, the season would be summer. I don't really like the cold weather. I just like warm weather for myself.
Okay. Fall.
I think we secretly influenced people a bit tonight. Perfect. So from there, I just wanted to introduce you to the program that I work for, the Sexual Harassment and Assault Resource Exchange. So we're part of the Human Rights Legal Support Center, and our services are completely free and completely confidential. And we'll give you the contact information towards the end, of course. But essentially, if you're experiencing workplace sexual harassment and you want some free legal advice, you're welcome to give us a ring here. I'd be the first person you'd speak to if you were to give us a call. And we give you a sense of what do the legal options look like, because we believe that an informed decision is an empowered decision. And then from there, we can talk about other possible referrals in your community as well, if you're looking to access anything like counseling or other kinds of support services. And we don't just talk about, say, just criminal law. We'd also talk about things like the human rights process. If you think you can't be at work anymore, we'd let you talk to you about some of your income support options as well. So even if you're a bit uncertain about what you want to do, we can give you a ring. I also think I'm an unofficial human resources translator. So if you want to kind of have an understanding of what HR is saying to you and why, if you're reporting something, I can give you a breakdown of that at any point. Perfect.
Thank you for that, Nora. So yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Center for Safer Sex and Sexual Violence Support, as I am one of the part-time coordinators that works there. So we are actually a service, I guess you could say, underneath the Ryerson Students Union. Our primary, I guess, focus is ensuring that we support survivors, that we implement programming that I guess you could say cultivates like consent culture and ensures that people are aware of the issues around sexual violence and sexual violence support. I think something else that's important to mention is that we do offer a anonymous and confidential peer-to-peer support line. So this support line, it's for community members of Ryerson. You can call in and receive referrals to different resources, especially because we recognize that support and the next steps for survivors looks different to different community groups, right? So with that, we try and ensure that the resources that we do provide on that line are do accommodate to different community groups and what support would look like to them. I think it's also important to note that we are working remotely. So as you can see down below at the bottom of the slide, there is the support lines number if you ever do need to call, as well as our Instagram handle. You can contact us that way, and the SASL, the support line email as well. So that's a little bit about the Center for Safer Sex and Sexual Violence Support. I don't know if Parneet wanted to just add something as she's the other part-time coordinator, or if I've got it all down. Let me know, Parneet.
Daisha, I think you've covered everything. We're good.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Fabulous. Okay. So next up, the last thing we want to do is sit here and tell you something you already know. So I'm going to send around a link in the chat to to everybody. And this chat's going to take you to a website called Padlet. Whatever you write here, it's anonymous. We won't know who wrote it. And we want you to fill in what you think sexual harassment is. And you're going to see other folks as they write. Just a heads up, we do use this for program evaluation purposes. So we will essentially use this as part of a study of our program to understand a bit about what folks know about sexual harassment and take it from there, just to understand, what folks know, how to help improve our education. In the bottom right corner, there's a little plus sign. If you just click on that, you can then write on a tile about what you think it is. So, okay, it is physical or verbal. Good. Aggression. And I cheated. I wrote unwanted and unwelcome sexual comments. That was me. Okay. Physical or verbal aggression towards a person for sexual favors. Good. Okay, perpetuating rape culture. Good. Boundaries not being respected. Sexual harassment is unwelcomed and unwanted advances. Undue harm. Good. Consent not being asked. Yes. Oh yeah, I think what's happening with the angry faces is I set the Padlet to remove what I thought would be like, say, F-bombs, but it looks like it takes out the phrase rape culture. But rape culture is a real thing and definitely something that we should be talking about. So my apologies if that's being slightly censored. Oppressive behaviors, good. Great, excellent. Perfect, everybody. So from there, we just kind of wanted to zoom into the legal definition of sexual harassment that we use in any kind of legal case. So sexualized actions and behaviors that are unwanted, unwelcomed, and harmful in the workplace. So this might include touching. It doesn't have to be, say, touching of genitalia. It could be touching the shoulder if it makes you uncomfortable, touching one's back if it makes you uncomfortable, or legs. Comments, jokes, and rumors of a sexualized nature. Requests for sexual favors, especially if it's from somebody that's very inappropriate, like there's a power dynamic at play, like it's coming from your boss, for example. The sharing of sexual images in the workplace, as well as the non-consensual distribution of intimate images as well. That is a very new area of law and a very fast-moving one. So leering, standing in someone's personal space, discussions about people's bodies or sex lives, and reprisals for declining romantic advances can all be examples of things that are happening in the workplace that could be sexual harassment. It could happen outside of the workplace as well. Perfect. So next, we just wanted to engage folks a little bit and get a sense of what folks know about sexual harassment. And we're going to be using a quick Zoom poll.
All right, folks. So for this one, there's a couple of questions. I would like to start off with the first question. So the first question is, who can experience sexual harassment? The options are as follows. Is it A, women? Is it B, LGBTQ plus folks? Is it C, non-managers? Or is it D, anyone and everyone?
Okay, we have a slightly different question, but we can start here.
Okay, no worries. So this question is asking if I do not say no or I am uncomfortable, I am consenting to the sexualized actions. Is it true, false, or unsure? Okay, so we've got the answers in now. So a majority of the folks have said false. That is the correct answer. But just as a side note, in the legal world, this could get complicated in some cases. So thank you for voting on this question. So I guess the next question would be what I had asked earlier, which is who can experience sexual harassment? And the options are, is it A, women, B, LGBTQ plus folks, C, non-managers, or is it D, anyone and everyone?
Okay, I do see some folks are answering D, anyone and everyone to us.
Yeah, so it seems that a majority of you have also answered anyone and everyone, which is correct. Also, in addition to that, however, some folks are more likely to report sexual harassment.
Excellent. So with this in mind, we were just going to do another Padlet, because I think what we're saying here is, yes, we may know what sexual harassment is, but it's not as though it's, easy all the time to report it. There are many barriers at play for folks. So on this next Padlet, we want you to tell us what you think the barriers might be in your experience, maybe in your friend's experience, to reporting sexual harassment in the workplace. And just a heads up again that this will be used for program evaluation, just to have a sense of what folks are thinking, but it's again anonymous, so we won't know who writes what. So often to the police, which is a huge barrier to BIPOC and queer folks. Mistrusting the system, position of the harasser, deportation, very good, whoever wrote deportation. There's a lot of, there's a really interesting paper that I was reading on that issue. Rape culture, oh, okay, it's not censoring that anymore, that's good. Family hearing about it, oh yeah, I've heard that from folks. They're worried about things becoming public, families hearing about it. The position of the harasser. It was your friend, good. Mistrust of the system. Care for perpetrator. Cyberbullying. Losing your job, yeah. It wasn't a big deal mentality, that does come up too. Great. Anything I haven't seen come up that I haven't mentioned? Oh, fear. Fear, yes. Lack of knowledge about the law. Feeling alone. Oh yeah, I've heard that from a lot of the clients. Well, thanks so much for all of the feedback we got from folks for this question. Just to give a bit of a summary of some of the barriers that we do see come up, but this definitely isn't all of them. The fears of the escalations and the retaliations, like a lot of folks call it grooming, but when I see in all the cases, I always see it as an escalation of events. So it starts off with like maybe comments, but then it proceeds to touching, then it proceeds to some sort of threat about your job status. So we often see those escalations occurring. For folks, it's sometimes that you need the income too. If you're living paycheck to paycheck, quitting the job and doing, a legal case of any sort, that can be a bit of a barrier as well. If you need the income to come in, you need to tide yourself over in some way, shape, or form. A lot of shame and embarrassment. A lot of times folks do feel like, well, I said yes to this thing, and that might come up, but when it got to something else, I wasn't okay with that. So that might make folks feel shame and embarrassed that something might get, exposed. Not knowing what the options are. So like a lot of the barriers about legal knowledge, fear of not being believed, and many other possible barriers as well. For sure. I know folks mentioned like some barriers specific to the police. That's great that folks are mentioning that. When folks talk to share, though, we can talk about all possible legal options. So we could talk about things that mean you could possibly see some justice, but you wouldn't have to go through the police. So if you think, for example, the company needs to have a new policy in place because there's this huge issue with their policy, that's something you could achieve through the human rights option. So you never feel like you have to go to the police. But if you ever want like a walkthrough of what that process would look like, you're welcome to always give Share a call so you can decide. Okay. Perfect.
So I would be happy to talk next a little bit about power dynamics and how that can, influence the likelihood of someone to, pursue one of these avenues in reporting an instance of sexual harassment. So with power dynamics, the two words there, power and dynamics, right? So when we think of dynamics in terms of people, we're thinking of how people interact with one another. And then with power, that usually involves someone's authority or ability to do something. And so to tie that concept together, we have a few factors that actually dictate who has more authority and therefore can impact the power dynamic between people. So for example, we have like age, sex, gender, citizenship or status in Canada, which I think is going to come up later on in the presentation with discussing how in the workplace that can affect your likelihood of reporting. If you're worried about possibly losing a work permit, for example. So then we have a couple more like work experience, your position at work. You may be an intern or a part-time worker and you're worried about reprisal for reporting your boss, for example. And so these different factors, they all can kind of work together to impede on how likely someone is or how comfortable someone is going to feel to report being harassed sexually at work. So yeah, if we want to go to the next slide, that's fine with me.
Perfect.
So here we actually have a scenario that hopefully will shine some light on what power dynamics can actually look like in the real world or the workplace, right? So meet Layla. What impacts power? Layla is a second-year international student at an Ontario post-secondary institution. She is studying nursing. She is doing a mandatory summer work term for credit and pay in a hospital. Her coworker, Davis, who is a permanent employee, is making sexual innuendos at work. Davis said that he wants to give her an anatomy tutorial in his apartment. Layla does not say anything, but this is making her uncomfortable. When they see each other on the bus, Davis touches her shoulder and looks at her breasts for a long time. Layla did not say anything in response. So just take a moment to think about the scenario that I've read out. And then please do give a little bit of thought to the question below, which is, what are the power dynamics for Layla? What are the factors here that may influence whether or not she feels, I guess, comfortable, if I could use that term, to report what she's experiencing at work? And if you could actually answer in the chat to myself or Parneet what you think about that, that would be great.
Sure, folks have are giving it a little thought and have their thinking caps on.
Yeah, no worry. I mean, it's definitely a tricky situation, right? When we're talking about people's livelihoods and their futures at risk. And then when we're talking about the barriers that are in place that may affect whether or not they take action. So I completely understand. Take your time to give it a bit of thought. Okay, so we have two answers that I can see so far. So one makes note of the fact that it's a senior coworker who may actually be of help in the future for getting work after the education. Right, so you wouldn't want to, I guess if I could say that, word, like ruin the relationship between you and this person who may actually help you progress in the future, right? You want to keep that relationship with them, and you feel like potentially by reporting, maybe you're I guess disrupting that relationship. What else do we have here? Layla could be jeopardizing their career if the coworker wanted to retaliate. Yes. Yeah, exactly. So that kind of connects to the last point, right? Where a barrier that Layla could be experiencing here is that this person who's harassing her has the power to potentially give her another job in the future, or maybe even fire her from this job that she needs, right? So that definitely could affect Layla's decision to report or not. Yep, and then a few more things in the chat. Being an international student and the fact that international students are disproportionately discriminated against. Yep, for sure. That could already make Layla potentially feel invalid if she does choose to report it. Fear of not getting her mandatory credit right. So Layla might be thinking, hey, if I report this, I may not be able to get my mandatory credit, and then what? You know, what do I do then? Now not only is my work affected, so is my education. So those are great answers. If anyone else wants to drop something in the chat, feel free to do so. But if Nora is fine with it, I'm ready to move on to the next slide. I think Parneet will be in the next one.
Yes, I think that was good. I'm glad folks mentioned the credit as well, because if you're an international student and something happens to your semester, you got to reapply for a new visa each time, and that's pricey.
All right, so that was a great discussion. We're going to move on to the next scenario, again, focusing on the power dynamics. So in this scenario, we get to meet Jessica and Eddie. And again, we're focusing on, what impacts power. So I'm going to read the following scenario here. Jessica and Eddie are new engineers at a startup. They both just finished school and are in their early 20s. Eddie's pronouns are they, them, but they are not out at work. Jessica and Eddie wanted to make a good first impression, but coworkers don't invite Jessica and Eddie to lunch or involve them in work-related discussions. Sometimes the other engineers leer at Jessica. Eddie overheard coworkers make comments about Jessica and Eddie engaging in sex acts with derogatory references about Eddie's gender that they seem feminine. Eddie is unsure if they should tell Jessica and feels uncomfortable with starting this conversation. Eddie knows if they report, they may need to disclose their gender identity. So again, with this scenario, and folks, please take your time in, thinking about the following. What are the power dynamics for Jessica and for Eddie? And again, you can use the chat to answer this question. So, so far we got one answer here, gender identity. Yep. It's understandable that when there's the intersectionality part of the gender that's a part of it, it can be difficult and can definitely impact someone's work when especially their gender identity is being frowned upon in that regards. Work experience, yep. Other answers here, Eddie is at risk of exposing themselves in unsafe environment. Great points, great points. Greater risk. So another person here said, as a non-binary person, they're at greater risk of being harassed at work. So that is something they need to worry about. But also Jessica is clearly at risk of being sexually harassed by coworkers, and to keep her safe, Eddie should talk to them about it. Mm-hmm. And also here, Eddie might feel discriminated after disclosing gender identity. Yeah, so gender identity, I'm seeing a lot of folks, great. Yeah, that's definitely one of the big the factors to consider here. Yeah.
Excellent. Good. So moving on, we're just going to do a quick video. And I think once I turn it on, I can turn on the captions, I believe, for this. So I'll just pause it for a second to do that. Oh, there we go. So captions should be on.
If you're still struggling with consent, just imagine instead of initiating sex, you're making them a cup of tea. You say, "Hey, would you like a cup of tea?" And they go, "Oh my God, I would love a cup of tea, thank you." Then you know they want a cup of tea. If you say, "Hey, would you like a cup of tea?" And they're like, I'm not really sure. Then you can make them a cup of tea, or not, but be aware that they might not drink it. And if they don't drink it, then, and this is the important bit, don't make them drink it. Just because you made it doesn't mean you're entitled to watch them drink it. And if they say, "No thank you," then don't make them tea at all. Just don't make them tea. Don't make them drink tea. Don't get annoyed at them for not wanting tea. They just don't want tea, okay? They might say, "Yes, please, that's kind of you." And then when the tea arrives, they actually don't want the tea at all. Sure, that's kind of annoying as you've gone to all the effort of making the tea, but they remain under no obligation to drink the tea. They did want tea, now they don't. Some people change their mind in the time it takes to boil the kettle, brew the tea, and add the milk. And it's okay for people to change their mind, and you are still not entitled to watch them drink it. And if they are unconscious, don't make them tea. Unconscious people don't want tea, and they can't answer the question, "Do you want tea?" because they're unconscious. Okay, maybe they were conscious when you asked them if they wanted tea, and they said yes, but in the time it took you to boil the kettle or brew the tea and add the milk, they are now unconscious. You should just put the tea down, make sure the unconscious person is safe, and this is the important part again, don't make them drink the tea. They said yes then, sure, but unconscious people don't want tea. If someone said yes to tea, started drinking it, and then passed out before they'd finished it, don't keep on pouring it down their throat. Take the tea away. Make sure they are safe, because unconscious people don't want tea. Trust me on this. If someone said yes to tea around your house last Saturday, that doesn't mean they want you to make them tea all the time. They don't want you to come around to their place unexpectedly and make them tea and force them to drink it, going, "But you wanted tea last week," or to wake up to find you pouring tea down their throat going, "But you wanted tea last night." If you can understand how completely ludicrous it is to force people to have tea when they don't want tea, and you are able to understand when people don't want tea, then how hard is it to understand when it comes to sex? Whether it's tea or sex, consent is everything. And on that note, I'm going to make myself a cup of tea.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing that video, Nora. It's definitely one of my favorite videos when it comes to understanding consent, right? In a way that's clear, that's easy to understand. And I like the little illustrations as well. It's very cute. So I think that video very neatly summarized what consent is, but we'll just draw out some points that it made in there that are important to keep in mind when we're thinking about consent. So firstly, consent is not silence, nor is it the absence of a no. It cannot be presumed or implied, and it must be ongoing. And consent can be withdrawn. And I think the last point is all of these points are important to make, but I think the last point is definitely important to keep in mind. You may have consented to something before in the past. Maybe it was this morning, maybe it was last weekend, but you still have a right at any time to decide to say no and withdraw your consent. And that ties into the point before that about it must be ongoing. All of these points tie in together to just define what consent is. And I think it's definitely important to have a clear idea of what consent is in order to keep yourself safe, in order to keep others safe, and also in order to treat others with respect.
Perfect. So from here, Parneet's gonna take it away. Just wanted to emphasize, of course, that the reason we talk about safety is not to say it's your responsibility or anything. We just want to say, like, we want you to know about some tips and tricks to have in your back pocket.
For sure, for sure.
Yeah, truly. So with regards to safety tips, it'd be good to know the resources when it comes to your own safety in the workplace. So again, like Nora has said, it is never your responsibility to prevent sexual harassment or assault. There are certain code words or phrases or a signal for help that folks can use. Something that might be worth thinking about is if everyone is familiar with the safety protocol. Also considering or knowing what the policies are around this situation. And there's something called panic buttons. Panic buttons are simply like knowing which contacts you can, I guess you can easily contact. So like emergency numbers or someone whom you can contact in a case when you're in an emergency situation or as such. And I think Nora can perhaps emphasize more on these points with respect to safety tips.
Yeah, the reason I say these kinds of things is because I do see a lot of cases where something does happen and then, the manager's like, why didn't you call and ask for a ginger ale? And apparently that was the procedure, but no one actually knew about it. So that's why I say, it's good to be an advocate in the workplace for safety. And make sure you know what everything is before anything does happen, and make sure that you're kind of looking out for your peers at work as well, making sure everybody knows the code word, making sure everybody knows where to find the policies, making sure everybody knows what happens when you push the panic button, because in some places it might be it goes straight to management. If you're working anywhere fancy like a bank, it goes probably straight to some fancy security people. But knowing what everything looks like, because these resources are available if somebody's harassing you sexually or otherwise and making you uncomfortable.
All right, so in addition to or more on safety, asserting yourself. So you may refuse unsafe work, i.e. working alone with someone who has been inappropriate. And for this one, you might want to seek specific legal advice on this first. Other things with regards to safety is meeting in a public place, for your safety. You could even ask a trusted third person to be present on the scene. You could request changes to the built environment, and you could request separations in the workplace.
Excellent. By built environment, we just mean, like, for example, if you can't be seen at your desk or your workstation of sorts, and somebody in the workplace is making you uncomfortable, you can ask to say, hey, can I work where I won't be alone, for example.
And Nora, I just wanted to ask very quickly about just the last slide. When it says seek specific legal advice on this first, if anyone does have questions about that or may have questions about that in the future, are they able to come to contact share and
Absolutely.
potentially ask? Okay.
Yes, absolutely. Talk about the right to refuse unsafe work. I'm sure most folks are familiar with that in terms of occupational health law. There can be a few areas where it does get a little bit tricky, but you can't be reprised against for refusing unsafe work, but always welcome to give us a ring if you want to double check about that.
Okay, good to know.
So from here, we're doing a little bit of a role play. And I know Lyndall is our Oscar-worthy volunteer for the day. And the reason we're talking about being assertive is I think especially folks who are a bit more marginalized, like, for example, young women, are often taught to be very polite, to be polite to the guy who might be asking you out on far too many dates, to not presume that somebody's being inappropriate if they're leering at you or staring at you in a way that makes you uncomfortable. So we wanted to talk a bit about strategies for being assertive. So one would be speaking from your diaphragm, being very clear with the no, and knowing that it's not that you're required to be polite if somebody's making you uncomfortable. You're definitely not. You don't have to let them down gently or anything. So from there, I know we're all waiting eagerly for Lyndall's Oscar-worthy performance.
Okay, so I will actually be doing the first scenario, the first role play with Lyndall. So just to set the scene a little bit, it takes place actually in an Apple store. And so I believe Lyndall will be coming in to the Apple store to get something done with her phone. So I'll start us off, Lyndall, no problem.
Okay.
Good?
Yeah, please.
Cool. Hello there. Welcome to the Apple Store. I see you have an iPhone 7 Plus. Do you want to trade it in for an iPhone XR? It's just $700. It's got a faster processor, a 12 megapixel camera, and front end speakers.
Oh, well, thank you for telling me about that, but I'm thinking, no thanks. I'm fine.
Are you sure about that? Do you have a financing plan with Apple? Look, I'll extend your Apple Care Plus for another year and lower your financing plan.
No, I'm pretty confident that I'm saying no, thank you.
Come on, I've got free accessories, headphones, a USB cable, an adapter, a carrying case, you name it, I've got it.
No, not today, thank you.
All right, no problem. I think my manager's over there if you want to speak to him.
Thank you very much.
Awesome. So I liked Lyndall's consistency in there. That was awesome.
Thanks. I'll take a bow.
Yeah, good job, Lyndall. Yeah.
All right, so now we're gonna be moving on to the next scene here, which I will be doing. And again, Lyndall, you're gonna be our lovely volunteer responding. So in this situation, we're meeting Jordan, the new boss, and they're in touch, or they're talking to a volunteer who's new at the place. So I'm gonna start the scene. Hey, I'm Jordan, your new boss. Wow, you look great in those pants today. Do you want to go out for a drink after work?
No, no thanks.
Oh, well, I've been noticing you've been working it today and working hard, and honestly, it's quite late here. I'll give you a ride home. Wink.
No, no, I'm worried that this is not appropriate.
Okay, then.
So now Lyndall's going to report to Human Resources. And what's Human Resources going to say?
All right, so in that case, I'll act as the human resources here. So what is this complaint about Jordan? That's not sexual harassment. Jordan was just being friendly.
The power dynamics in that conversation made me feel very uncomfortable.
Good. Good. I like the citation, the legal citation of power dynamics. Excellent. Perfect. So in that scenario too, I like Linda was very clear. I ain't interested in Jordan, and it was very clear from the get-go, and really making it clear that it was definitely inappropriate. That's a great way to be assertive, and didn't back down with Human Resources. That's great.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so we're moving on now to talking a little bit more about safety, especially, oops, my apologies. But yeah, talking a little bit more about safety, especially when you're under pressure, as we've seen it from the role plays, right? When someone is trying to apply pressure to you to get you to agree to whatever it is they want to do. But we want to make sure that you know that it's within your rights to refuse a ride home from someone, for example, to also refuse to answer questions that make you uncomfortable. So examples of this is someone inquiring about where you live, about your romantic or sex life, your sexual preferences, and other personal questions, right, about yourself. And it's also within your right to decline to consume alcohol or take drugs if you do not trust the person. So it's important to understand that you have a right to say no, you have a right to decline offers, and often in doing that, you are asserting yourself and being assertive.
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to send around the second last link of today. It is a reporting tip sheet that folks can download. If you want me to autograph this later, let me know. I'm sure management will approve sending it to you by mail. So this is essentially like a back pocket resource that you can always keep on you if you ever do need to go to human resources or management, depending on where you're working. To report any kind of sexual harassment in the workplace, to understand what your employer's legal obligations are and what you might see. So folks can definitely be reading that over and keeping that. And then for our very last activity, I want you to pretend that I'm on vacation and you're the substitute teacher. You're suddenly me answering the phone at work. And Taylor has called you. So Taylor has a new job in a warehouse as a shipper/receiver. Congrats, Taylor. Their boss has been making sexual jokes in the workplace. Initially, Taylor joined in on the jokes. The comments/jokes have escalated and now are making them uncomfortable. The boss has started making jokes about having sex together. Taylor does not want to do any sexual activities with their boss. The boss wants them to work late together alone to do inventory next Tuesday. Taylor is worried the situation may escalate. The boss just said, "I can't wait to get up and close." So I want you to tell me a bit about, in the chat function, about what you think reporting could look like for Taylor. So the employer does have a duty to investigate, but if the employer's not investigating, what might Taylor's options look like? If an employer doesn't investigate, report to HR, good. definitely Taylor should be doing that. Another thing to do would be putting together like a list of notes of everything that's happened when you go to HR. That gives them a sign that you're pretty serious about this, and the fact that you've been documenting, because contemporaneous notes could become evidence in a legal case. And that could mean that's going to scare the employer a little bit into taking things a bit more serious. Yes, absolutely. You're always welcome to speak, to share about the guidance. And I think, as you saw, there's a lot of escalations happening in this workplace as well. So one thing that we see coming up in this scenario is that Taylor's about to have to work alone with the boss on Tuesday. And that probably sounds like a fairly high risk situation, because the boss has been escalating and they're making a lot of innuendos. And it does sound like something quite dangerous could be about to happen. So in that circumstance, when Taylor goes to human resources, they should be very adamant bringing up some of the safety tips, talking about the fact that the employer on the interim level, while they do their investigation, they have an obligation to provide some interim accommodations. That might mean you don't work alone with Jordan. Sorry, not with Jordan, but with this boss. So I do see some folks mentioning possibly taking a sick day or vacation day. If that's, what you feel comfortable doing, that is within your rights to try and avoid working with the boss. But if you go to HR and ask them to investigate, there might be grounds that you should be on a paid leave of absence while the investigation is ongoing. It does depend on the case. So, Taylor doesn't necessarily have to use up all of their sick days or vacation days right now. And they can still have their income coming in, because it's not their fault that the boss is doing this to them. It's the employer's liability to handle this.
Nora, if I may ask a question about that.
Yeah.
Actually. So would something like that be able to be found in the policy, like the handbook, or would that just have to depend on like when you speak to HR? What would that look like?
It usually come down to HR's discretion. They don't usually advertise their obligation to possibly put you on a paid leave of absence if you're making a complaint about sexual harassment in the workplace. And a lot of employers, they don't often do that, but that might be something that could be recouped in a human rights case as well, as a specific damage. But unfortunately, that's like a year later. If you need the income right now, I do acknowledge it's not always perfect for folks. But it is something that some employers might have in their policy. If an employer has got a really, really spelled out, detailed policy, it might be in there. Sometimes if an employer has a really, really detailed, spelled out policy, it's probably because they've been litigated against before too.
Yeah.
You never know, because it's usually settled in a mediation, but yeah.
Okay. Good to know. I mean, this is definitely something to know, right? In terms of policies and how the workplace may operate in these cases. I think you have someone else who said something in the chat, so I'll leave it to that.
Yes, I like the assertive response. Excellent. Because studies do show, like, the more assertive you are with somebody, the less likely these things are to continue and to escalate so much. So I'd say it's your responsibility. The boss really shouldn't be doing this. Organizational liability, I can assure you, is established in this case. But it still can be helpful to mitigate further harm and to feel like you have control of the situation. And no worries about the typos. Those happen, my friend. Perfect. So with that, we are going to move into a bit of an Ask Me Anything. And I believe we're going to stop recording at this point.